Most people assume that having many interests is an advantage. But for a certain kind of person, it quietly becomes one of the most disorienting experiences of their life. You are curious about too many things, you start too many paths, and somewhere along the way, you begin to wonder whether something is fundamentally wrong with the way your mind works. This is the experience we will examine today. Not as a personal flaw, not as a motivational problem, you can resolve it with better discipline, but as something with a real psychological structure, one that, once you understand it, changes how you see yourself entirely. Here is how the experience typically unfolds. You become genuinely interested in something, a field, an idea, a skill. You read about it, you think about it, you feel real momentum building. And then, at some point, another subject pulls your attention. Not because you are bored or undisciplined, but because it genuinely fascinates you. So you follow that thread too. And then another opens. Before long, you have accumulated deep interest in several areas, but no single one you can point to and say, "This is what I am. This is my thing." And the world, in its quiet way, keeps asking you to have a thing. The discomfort this produces is not merely practical. It goes deeper than that. It touches identity, because the people around you, or at least the ones who appear most outwardly successful, seem to have solved this problem effortlessly. They found their lane early. They stayed in it. They built something vertical, something stacked, something legible to the outside world. And you are standing in front of what looks like a field of open doors, unable to explain why you are not walking through just one of them and closing the rest behind you. This is where many intelligent people begin to misdiagnose themselves. They decide the problem is commitment, or focus, or willpower. They conclude that their curiosity is actually a form of avoidance, that they scatter themselves across many interests because they are, at some level, afraid of going deep into any single one. And so they carry this low-level guilt, this persistent sense of intellectual restlessness as personal failure. But something interesting happens when you examine this more carefully. The assumption buried inside that self-criticism is that there is one correct shape for how a mind should organize knowledge. Depth is the goal. Specialization is the destination. Anything that pulls you sideways is, by definition, a distraction. This assumption is so widely accepted that most people never think to question it. They absorb it from school systems, from career structures, from the way expertise is publicly recognized and rewarded. Go deep. Pick one thing. Become the person who knows more about that specific subject than almost anyone else. That model is real. It works. It produces genuine mastery and genuine contributions. But it is not the only functional way a mind can be built. There is a different cognitive pattern, one that researchers in creativity and learning have studied for decades, in which the mind builds knowledge laterally rather than vertically. Instead of descending deeper and deeper into a single domain, it extends outward, finding structural connections between different fields, recognizing when a pattern in one discipline mirrors a pattern in another, and synthesizing insights across areas that normally never communicate with each other. This is not a lesser form of intelligence. It is a different architecture built for a different kind of problem. And here is where the pattern becomes clearer. The person with this kind of mind does not experience breadth as a compromise. They experience it as the actual mechanism of their thinking. When they read about behavioral economics and find themselves thinking about evolutionary biology, they are not getting distracted. They are noticing that both fields are describing related aspects of the same underlying human system. When they study architecture and find it connecting to psychology, mathematics, and cultural history, they are not losing focus. They are perceiving a structure that a purely architectural education might never have made visible. This is a distinct cognitive strategy. And like all strategies, it has a context in which it works extremely well and a context in which it appears to fail entirely. It works well when problems are genuinely complex and cross-disciplinary, when a solution requires borrowing a framework from one domain and applying it unexpectedly to another. It appears to fail when evaluated by institutions and systems designed specifically to measure vertical depth. When the primary instrument for assessing intelligence is how far down you have gone in one place, lateral movement will always register as a deficit. This matters because most of us are evaluated by those institutions at exactly the age when we are trying to form a coherent understanding of who we are and how our minds function. So we internalize the instrument's verdict. We conclude we are scattered, unfocused, unable to commit. We accept a measurement that was never designed to capture what we are actually doing. It is important to be precise about what identity reframing means here, because it is easy to confuse it with simple reassurance. This is not about telling yourself that you are fine and the world is simply wrong. It is about correcting a genuine misclassification. The question is not whether you lack focus. The question is whether focus, in your particular case, operates differently from what the standard model assumes. And the evidence, examined honestly, often suggests that it does. People with this cognitive style frequently demonstrate what might be called integrative depth, not shallowness spread across many things, but a form of deep understanding that only becomes visible when two or more domains are placed in direct relation to each other. The insight does not live inside any single field. It lives in the space between fields. And the mind that has been moving restlessly through many territories is, often without fully realizing it, constructing the internal infrastructure needed to perceive those spaces. This is not a romantic description of genius. It is a description of a specific cognitive function, one that takes longer to produce visible output, is harder to credential in conventional terms, and requires a different kind of patience. Not the patience of staying in one place, but the patience of trusting that lateral movement is accumulating something real. There is a practical implication worth naming directly. If you have this kind of mind, the pressure to specialize too early, to choose a single path before you have built sufficient internal landscape, can work directly against you. Not because specialization is inherently wrong, but because premature narrowing, imposed before the lateral architecture has had adequate time to develop, can sever the very connections that would eventually make your thinking distinctively valuable. This does not mean avoiding commitment indefinitely. It means recognizing that for certain minds, the exploration phase is not a delay before the real work begins. It is the real work, the wide reading, the apparent tangents, the gradual accumulation of frameworks from different fields. These are not preparation for thinking. They are the thinking itself. So return, for a moment, to the original feeling. The discomfort of facing many open doors with no single clear path forward. The sense of being constitutionally different from people who found their lane and stayed in it. The quiet guilt of scattered interests and the inability to simply choose. Consider what that experience looks like if the original diagnosis was wrong. Not evidence of a failure to commit, but evidence of a mind that builds knowledge in a particular way, laterally, connectively, across domains, toward insights that no single specialization would ever have made accessible. The restlessness was never the problem. The problem was measuring a lantern by how narrowly it focuses its beam. Understanding the structure of your own mind does not tell you exactly what to do next, but it does change the quality of the question you find yourself asking. Instead of asking why you cannot be more like the people who chose one path and stayed on it, you can ask something considerably more useful. Given the way my mind actually works, what kinds of problems am I genuinely built to understand? That question leads somewhere real. And it begins, as most honest progress does, with finally seeing clearly the thing you have been looking at all along.